Well, here we are, back in Dominaria again, and with a bunch of old faces returning in the story, and in the cards coming in the set. And what better character to pick from this lineup than a fan favourite such as Braids the Arisen Nightmare. Now Braids is infamous in the history of Commander, with Braids Cabal Minion long being banned in the format, and Braids Conjurer Adept being a disgusting value engine that brings absolute chaos to the game. But this new Braids Arisen Nightmare is clearly an attempt to provide us with a replacement for the banned Braids, with a mono-black colour identity and a sacrifice ability that interacts with our opponents. Braids Arisen Nightmare is a 3/3 legendary nightmare for 1 black that reads, at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. If you do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it, and if they don't, they lose 2 life and you draw a card. So that means in Commander, where you normally have 3 opponents, this ability can easily draw you 3 cards and deal 6 damage around the table. Particularly if you're able to sacrifice cards that opponents cannot, or don't want to, sacrifice of their own. At worst it gives you a 3-for-1 each turn, and at best you throw away a token for 3 cards, along with introducing a bunch of really fun table interactions as your opponents have to make really hard choices. I absolutely love this design. But what sort of deck do you build around such a commander? Well, normally I like to build around some sort of theme for a deck on this channel, but Braids is a pretty generic value piece. So instead this time we're going for mono black value, with reanimation, drain effects, and card theft just to have some fun. As always, we're going to build this to an $80 budget, and trying to build the best bang for our buck. Let's dive into the biggest category of the deck, reanimation and recursion effects. For that we have Persist, Victimize, Dread Return, Command the Dreadhorde, Dawn of the Dead, Mere Retriever, Viconia Drow Abstate, Drana the Last Bloodchief, Sepulchral Primordial, Memorial to Folly, Buried Ruin, Malakar Rebirth, and Liliana Death's Majesty. Most commonly, we're going to want to sacrifice creatures to Braids' ability, so we need lots of ways to bring them back over and over to sacrifice again. Lots of creatures in this deck also have Enter the Battlefield effects, so by sacrificing and replaying them, we can get that extra value from them. No matter how you build a Braids deck, reanimation is going to be part of that deck, as it's going to be a key way for you to keep that value coming back over and over. This cycle of death is also improved by the second category in the deck, Life Drain. Braids herself will be causing life loss if our opponents aren't sacrificing stuff, so we can help that along with our own effects. We have Blood Artist, Zulaport Cutthroat, Falconwreath Noble, Grey Merchant, Sir Conrad the Grim, and Exsanguinate. While we don't have a lot of these, some of the really big hitters like Grey Merchant and Sir Conrad can be game enders when used in the right way. And of course Exsanguinate is a big finisher card of the deck, and also holds a fair bit of the budget as well. But as the card can completely swing a game, it is well deserving of its spot. Rounding out these cards we have some theft effects with Gonti, Lord of Luxury, Elder Brain, Lorcan, Warlock Collector, and the Sepulchral Primordial, to steal cards from the library, hand, and graveyard of our opponents. These are totally just a flex spot in this deck, for stuff I like to do, but they are all really good in their own right. Now Braids does open up some interesting play patterns with some unusual cards, so let's talk about those. First we have Persistent Specimen, Reassembling Skeleton, and Tenacious Underdog as recurable creatures that we can bring back over and over each turn to sacrifice to Braids at the end of turn. Then we have enchantments like Demonic Law and Treacherous Blessing, which are draw enchantments with massive downsides. Except that we can avoid most of those downsides by simply sacrificing them at the end of our turn. Not only that, but most opponents are not going to have spare enchantments lying around that they can sacrifice, and they will hopefully draw us even more cards. Along that line of thinking, we also have Glistening Oil, which is not only thematic for what's currently going on in the Magic storyline, but it's an enchantment that comes back to hand when it's destroyed. We then have Drownyard Temple, which can act as a recurable land, and since no opponent is going to want to unramp themselves to stop that sacrifice, we should be able to use it over and over to draw cards. Lastly, we have Ichor Wellspring, which can draw us cards on the way in and then again on the way out, along with whatever else we get off Braids' ability. These cards can all help supercharge Braids' ability to draw so many cards, while making it very difficult for opponents to match that sacrifice. But we don't just want to rely on Braids for our sacrificing, since if she gets hated off the table, we still want the deck to function. So we have some extra sacrifice outlets with Carrion Feeder, Viscera Seer, Phyrexian Vault, and High Market as backups. It's also smart to have some extra sacrifice outlets on board to help dodge things like Swords to Plowshares and other exile effects. If we don't have enough creatures yet, well, let's also chuck in some more token generators. such as Jadar, Ghoul-Caller of Nephalia, who makes a disposable zombie each turn, Pawn of Ulamog for some tokens that make mana, Sangir Autocrat to bring the boys, Underworld Hermit for squirrels, and Liliana's Death Majesty for more zombies. All of these just help fill up our board with sacrifice fodder, both for Braids and for other synergy within the deck. Moving on to the staples, let's talk about Ramp. For that we have Sol Ring, Wayfarer's Bauble, Arcane Signet, Charcoal Diamond, Cold Steel Heart, Mindstone, Prismatic Lens, Commander Sphere, Decanter of Endless Water, Nyx Lotus, Solemn Simulacrum, Black Market, Myriad Landscape, and Terrain Generator. This deck wants a lot of mana to run, since if Braids is working well, we will have a lot of cards and stuff to do. So along with our normal suite of low cost mana rocks, we also have a few big generators with Black Market and Nyx Lotus for those big later turns. The deck also runs a copy of Dark Ritual, as it can help us cheat Braids in just that little bit earlier, or just give us some extra choice later in the game. On to removal, and we have Bone Shredder, Plague Crafter, Ravenous Chupacabra, Defile, Infernal Grasp, Hero's Downfall, Feed the Swarm, Tectonic Edge, and Spine of Ishtar for our targeted removal, and Massacre Girl, Crux of Fate, and Deadly Tempest for board wipes. This is a lot of removal, but this deck isn't going to storm out quickly and win, so we need to be prepared to buy some time and defend from our opponents. Spine of Ishtar is a particularly good card for this deck, despite the mana cost, since we can play it out to remove artifacts, which is something Mono Black can't normally deal with, and then sacrifice it at end of turn to get it back to hand. Otherwise, this is a pretty standard set of removal for a Mono Black budget deck. For graveyard removal, we have the always reliable Soul Guide Lantern and Bojuka Bog. Not much to say here, and if you still aren't playing Soul Guide Lantern, you really need to get on that. Despite the cards that Braids will produce, we do need a couple of draw staples to help back her up. For that, we have Demonic Law, Treacherous Blessing, Liliana's Contract, Read the Bones, Iga Wellspring, and Phyrexian Vault. It's not a lot, but our commander will be the main card draw engine, so we don't need a lot of extra draw effects. Sadly, we don't have the 4 demons to win with Liliana's Contract, as I just couldn't find good ones to fit within this budget. So that enchantment is just extra fodder for Braids to sacrifice. The last card we haven't discussed is Butcher of Malakir, an amazing sacrifice effect that is an obvious include in a deck like this. Without the budget restrictions, its friends such as Dictator Erebos and Gravepact would also be automatic includes here. Butcher just makes the choice even harder for our opponents and gets way more value out of that sacrifice at end of turn. Oh, and to mention, we have one tutor in the deck with Profane Tutor, just because I wanted at least one way to search up a card since we are in the colour of tutors. Moving on to the lands, we've discussed all the utility lands being used already, so it's just another 25 basic swamps to round out the land base. And this deck does really need a high density of swamps. It has a lot of black pips in the mana costs, so don't be too quick to add in utility lands that tap for colourless. And that wraps up the deck. A bit quicker than normal because it is a very straightforward build. Braids generates a lot of generic value for a black deck, so she really lets you branch out in whatever direction you want to. I've kept a fairly balanced build with this, but you can go hard into Reanimation or Life Drain with Braids, and have a really fun time. Or just go for big mana black, using Braids to help fuel your hand while ramping like crazy. The main way this deck is trying to win is through incremental damage with drain effects like Zulaport Cutthroat and Blood Artist, coupled with finishes like Grey Merchant and Exsanguinate to end opponents. We don't have any infinite combos this time, however there is a lot of fun synergy here, such as using Braids and Dawn of the Dead to recur a Grey Merchant every turn, or make a ton of squirrels with Underworld Hermit and let them die while you have your drain effects out. It's hard to know right now how much of a threat Braids' ability will end up being in a few months' time. Maybe she'll be seen as this crazy strong commander and everyone just agrees you have to play along with sacrificing to stop the card draw. Or maybe she'll just be meh and you'll be able to get all the cards you want from her. She's definitely going to have a reputation of some kind in the future, and that will affect how this deck is played, hopefully for the better. The theft cards in particular that I've included are purely in there because I enjoy that style of play. You could totally rip those out and throw in big scary cards and the deck would run just as well. Maybe take advantage of Liliana's Contract for an extra win condition for example, and run a bunch of demons. Of course, the main weakness of a deck like this is going to be graveyard removal, since one of the best ways we have for generating value each turn. But even in that case, just playing out big threats and beating face is going to be a successful strategy still. This is a hard deck to rate in terms of power level. I can say it's a 7, but without knowing how people react to Braids, it's very hard to tell. You have some big splashy effects in here. The deck certainly can't hold up to being in an arch enemy situation for very long. It is stronger than a precon I would rate, but might struggle if you're running it up against more expensive and focused decks that just have better payoffs than can fit within this budget. But on that topic, let's talk about how you could really juice this deck up and how I could see Braids being used in the wider Commander community. The closest fit to Braids in my mind is Tergrid, who would be an amazing fit in the 99 of a Braids deck. And if we went down that route, Braids could be the linchpin in a dedicated black stacks deck with all the sacrifice payoffs like Dictate of Erebos, Tergrid, It That Betrays and such, making it really hard for our opponents to keep things in play and stealing what they do play. Another direction would obviously be into heavy life loss and lean into Braids' other ability so that opponents have to sacrifice things in order to protect their life totals. Exquisite Blood, Meathook Massacre, and Kakusho the Evening Star, cards like that. Just make each turn as painful as possible as we cycle through the deck, dropping cards in the graveyard quickly and reducing our opponents to low life totals. Most of these effects also have fuel our life gain, allowing us to continue to take advantage of that as well. There are some other ways to abuse Braids' sacrifice, as here's one of the few ways Black has to remove its own enchantments. For example, we could run something like Demonic Pact, using Braids to dispose of it before it kills us. There is also Infernal Tribute and Forbidden Ritual, two reserve list cards that kind of mirror Braids' ability, and would be great in a bad stuff deck to remove problem cards from your own board. That is a pretty weird deck build, and I'd love to see someone come up with a build that abuses the sacrifice anything part of her ability. I don't think it'd be particularly strong, but it would be really interesting. And I think that'll do for now. Braids is a really fun looking commander with a seriously powerful ability that can fit into almost any black deck. I wish you luck if you go on to build this deck, and let me know how it actually works out. In channel news, it's been a little while since I've uploaded anything, mainly due to a big project in my life that I've been working to finish. But now that's completed, I'll be back a little bit more regularly to post content again. I've been really happy to see the channel continue to grow despite all this, so thanks for everyone that watches these, and I'll talk to you again next time.